Hello there. Usual check the camera, see if it's working. Yeah, it's working. I don't know why I ever doubt it, but I do. So here we have a Yamaha FG335 II, and it's pretty old. Wow, is it old. I think I'll get Henry to have a little chat with the inside of this thing when I take the strings off. But here we have, this is a, I don't even know what year this is, but it's an old beast. But it's a beautiful old thing, and well, it's not in tune, but it's still a beautiful old thing. What I'll do is just let's get a note of this thing down here. A plectrum to hand. There we go. In the bass department. Memories of Pink Floyd's final cut there, 1982, 3 probably. Anyway, this is a lovely old thing. It's got Yamaha stamped tuners on the back here. Never seen those before exactly like that, but and it's got a very old folk club sticker on here, which is kind of in the same style we used to have on our guitars, called "Keep Music Live" or "No Nuclear" and whatever protesting we were protesting about. But anyway, so this is a lovely little thing with something. The letter E is floating around in here. Wow, not sure why, but the E is floating around. So this is kind of interesting in the sort of way that a lot of old acoustics are interesting. And the thing about old acoustics is, wow, this has had a bash here, so it's got a big dent, but it's missed the fret mainly. The thing about old acoustics is, because they're wood, they seem to all do the same thing eventually over time. And there's a couple of things that they do. The first one is this sort of inevitable one, which results in the geometry of the neck, which originally is designed to be slightly back at a slight angle, so that you get a nice, based on the position of the bridge as fixed in the factory, you get the correct playing action over the frets down to the nut. And over time, the force of the strings seems to pull or distort the body of the guitar slightly. It's kind of, no, I've never had it explained to me really what exactly happens, and as you can see, it's not pulling up from here, so it hasn't separated the joint and gone like that. But definitely something about the guitar over time changes, so that you get an increase in action, because basically the end of the guitar neck relative to the body is going up. Some cat crying. It seems to happen to any guitar of any age, and there doesn't seem to be any means by which that can be arrested, unless it's, as somebody saw it said on a video the other day, unless it's made of titanium or carbon fibre or something. But wood seems to behave in that way. So that's one challenge. And of course, when you when you get to that age of a guitar that is there, the reason often you'll notice it is because the playing action here is huge, and although it's playable, by definition or by default you'll be actually pressing the strings slightly sharp in order to fret them. It isn't so much that somebody playing in a folk club would notice, because you're often playing down here and it sounds pretty nice for that. But if you were, depending on notes being in tune, up here you start to hear the slight difference in intonation. Anyway, that's the problem with the neck reset thing. Is what it means is reset means you remove the neck in order to reset the geometry or the way it fits into the body here. So imagine you take off this neck, including this heel part, and you shave down or adjust or shim or shave down, whichever it needs, both the heel and this underlying section here, so that you are kind of changing the tilt of these parts in relation to the guitar body. So sometimes it's done with chiseling and fine woodwork adjustments, sometimes it's done with shims of a certain thickness, a precise thickness, to get those two pieces, the neck and this heel section, to get them to fit in at exactly the angle that you want. From what I've researched, and I've never done it, and it is a proper luthier job, so it's not something I would do. I'm not equipped for it, and I wouldn't want to do it. It's probably, people I've seen advertising it as a service seem to be advertising it for around the £600 mark. And in a way, it's regardless of what the guitar is, so it's going to take the same time and effort, whether it's a relatively budget Yamaha. I don't know what the price range of this Yamaha was. I know they're very well respected, some of these old Yamahas, FGs. Anyway, regardless of the actual price point, it takes the same amount of work and effort on a standard acoustic guitar to reset the neck. And I've looked at the checklist for it. Another luthier produced a very comprehensive PDF, which actually I might try and share with some folks on my Facebook page, because it's actually quite interesting in enlightening you what it takes. Because sometimes I think people, when somebody says, "Oh yeah mate, 600 quid for a neck reset," are you serious? It's a piece of wood. But if you actually look at what is required to do this thing, it's a phenomenal amount of work. You basically have to pull off one of the frets to begin with. You have to then steam with a careful application of dry steam. Well, it's a bit of a counterintuitive term, but anyway, apparently you steam off the best you can the wood joint here, or you soften the wood joint and you remove this thing here. In doing so, what it usually requires is, as far as I've seen, it requires either partial or complete refret. So as soon as you start working with steam around frets, they start to move. It's not so bad on an acoustic, but if they literally come up, you've either got to get them stuck back down, or if you're starting to pull frets on an old guitar, you might as well be looking at a refret and a radius of the fingerboard and so on. So it starts to get complicated. You've got to get the thing off safely without damaging anything. You've then got to make precise measurements. You've got to cut and make various shims and adjustments and put them back on under a precise geometry, which if you get it wrong by the tiniest fraction will just mess the whole thing up and it won't be playable. So it really is a big old deal. And of course it just becomes obvious that only really makes sense to high value guitars, whether that's high value in terms of cash or sentimental value, which of course this could well be for the person, but obviously then the choice of whether they do that is individual to them. So that's something that happens to pretty much all old acoustic guitars, just through the sheer load of the strings on a wooden neck, regardless of whether it's got a truss rod, which of course they all do, but most of them do. But the truss rod can't stop that happening. This thing has a more immediate problem, which is common to many guitars that I get down here, or that live down this part of the world, and that is the bellying of the top, which is caused primarily by humidity. I'm going to see if I can get you to see this. It's very simple to see when you see it. Get a flat edge, and I'll go down, well, I'll put it sort of roughly in the middle, and you can see that there's a huge gap you know, and basically it just means this whole top is bowed upwards, or bellied as it's called, and changes depending on how close you go to the back. But behind the bridge, because of all the force on the bridge, it's bellying upwards there. That's a result of over humidification, and so well, it's a combination of over humidification and the forces already acting on this bridge which are pulling it this way. But it doesn't help when the top gets more moisture than it should have, then it expands, and where it has to go somewhere, and so coupled with the forces of the bridge pulling this way, it just suits the wood to expand upwards, and the result is that it raises the bridge upwards, which gives you a much higher action. So it's a combination of problems, at least, you know, due to old age and humidity on this guitar. What it results in is a playing action down what I kind of just crudely measure for now at the last fret of, well, it's over 5 millimeters, which is unplayable. Now, the kind of easiest, quote unquote, one of these to fix, cheapest one of them to fix in a sense, is the humidity problem. Currently my whatever that meter's called, living in the shed, is registering a sort of, you know, outdoor British, well not outdoor, but shed bound British southwest of England humidity, relative humidity of 80%, which is way too high for a guitar which prefers something like 50 to 60 range, and that 50 to 60 range is typically what you find indoors or inside a British house. So and in fact actually our home is probably a little higher than that, again because it's not a brilliantly built house, but it's not substantially damp, but it's a little higher, and so in the 10 years that my Fender acoustic has been hanging on pegs, it has a little bit of bellying too, but not anywhere near as much as this. So if this guitar stayed out here for 6 months, this would probably even increase a little bit more. Sometimes what happens when that goes up is that because it's no longer a flat surface, it parts company with the glue or the underside of the bridge, and then you get the whole thing just pulls forward into the point where it finally breaks off. But that hasn't happened here. It's bellying with the bridge still nicely attached to its top. Anyway, so the point is, of the two things, the neck reset thing is an expensive one, but it's also one that you wouldn't consider until you had fixed, if you can, the humidity problem, because taking care of this excess humidity, by all accounts, and I've not done it over any long time, so I don't have the direct first-hand experience, but I know people who have and do, taking care of this humidity will literally dry out this top, which then sucks the water out of it and pulls it tighter and therefore flattens it, because basically the wood is shrinking, and so it kind of flattens back out to where it should be between these fixed braces, to the point where if you lived in the desert, for example, eventually it goes too far and it's tight and it becomes like the skin of a drum, and becomes concave slightly. That's another problem, and then it splits usually. So this needs taking care of, but again, that's the thing with the neck reset is until we've corrected this humidity problem, we don't know how desperate we are in need of a neck reset. I suspect, looking at the height of this, that if we cured the humidity problem on this, the bellying, we would actually get back a pretty nice playing action from this. Now I'm looking at as presented to me, so the thing, what can I recommend the customer to do? Well, I guess there's 3 stages really. There's the very short term, how do I make this guitar more playable today for my customer who wants to play it at an open mic night, let's say next week. So what do we have? We have a playable chord guitar, which is a bit grubby and a little bit hard to play, partly because of this, but actually when you look closer, it's because the action down here is pretty high. So the first thing I can do is improve that action. I can also change the strings, put some nice new strings on, which will make it sound a hell of a lot better. Now, I was also looking down this end to see, is there any more room for adjustment on the saddle? And the reality is there probably is, but I don't want to do it. And I don't want to do it because If I take the saddle down any further, then I disappear the remaining brake angle, and there's hardly any on the E string, a bit more on the actually the lower strings. But if you go eventually, if you go too flat, the string will end up hitting the top of the bridge itself, which will kill the sound altogether. But we're at the point now where it's already been adjusted downwards, and this will have happened by somebody who's owned the guitar or a tech along the way as this top has bellied upwards. Who's calling me? Somebody. Who's calling me? Who's calling? Is that you, Sid? Are you calling? There's a pair of Wellingtons in the hedge. Why? I don't know. That's the weirdest thing. Somebody's green Wellingtons are in the hedge. Yeah, so as this has come up over the years, somebody's progressively shaved this down until we've reached a point where there probably already isn't enough of a brake angle of the E string over the nut. So in other words, if that's the nut there, you want something like that to put enough pressure down on the nut, sorry, on the saddle to transmit the sound through. And actually currently it's more like that, because it happens if the height of the saddle goes up, the brake angle will go higher, and if the height of the saddle comes down, it'll get lower. So I don't really want to do any adjustment to that at all, because we'll just run out of. Eventually, this E string, it's almost going to be free flying over the top of that saddle. Now, some people who haven't got a plan to dehumidify, or once they've dehumidified, then look at whether it needs a reset or not. If they have no plans to do that, some people can make a more destructive solution, and you can do it if it's your guitar and you haven't got the money or the time or whatever. A way of making this more playable would be to first of all take off some of the height, so physically plane off or chisel or sand and reduce this bridge. Then what you'll find is that your pegs will sit further down. Your nut, your saddle will stay kind of at the same height to begin with, but there'll be clearance on both sides and the brake angle will have increased. Now, you still may want to take the saddle down to get yourself a bit better action, so you just go a little bit further down. So you calculate maybe you might take 2.5 to 3 mils off this whole bridge here. It's quite destructive, right? It's not like you're going to want to sell this old guitar to someone else after that. And sometimes if people don't want to go that far, they might cure what's currently a bit of a problem with the brake angle by cutting slots in here so that this string doesn't go over the edge. It's hard to see, but currently the string goes over the saddle here in a slightly very tiny downward angle to the edge of the hole where the peg sits, and then it goes down the hole at a very extreme angle. If you cut Dremel a slot in here, and you'll see it on lots of old guitars, people have Dremeled slots in here, it allows the string to dive under the surface of the rosewood or wherever this is earlier, before it gets to the edge of the hole, if you like. You've kind of extended the hole out, so you can cure the lack of brake angle with a bit of dremeling here. Again, it's not something I want to do, because I want to advise the customer to get this humidity problem solved, and then, you know, if you can be disciplined with it over the next 6 months, then re-look at it and see how much we've got back in terms of improved playing action. People like Robert Taylor of Taylor Guitars is absolute evangelical on the subject of humidity. I remember reading that he said something like 90% or some, you know, the vast majority of all setup problems on acoustic guitars, he said, are caused by incorrect humidity. And I know that in principle, and I think a couple of months ago I recommended a customer take their Martin to a local music shop that has a dehumidifying facility, like a cupboard, I guess. And I suggested he took his Martin there because it had exactly this same problem. And I think it cost him 25 GB pounds and 5 days of sitting it in this cabinet. And he said when it came back, it felt as good as new. So, you know, there is evidence that getting the humidity sorted is a fantastic solution to this action. problem. And you know, if I start drilling holes in this now, it's going to be a permanent solution to what should be a temporary problem. Hello, good morning. Good day, morning. 1 second. Got medical reports on family members to report. Oh yeah, just reporting in on my mum, who had surgery for cancer yesterday, and is out and in recovery intensive care place, and seems to be doing well, so some things to be grateful for. Anyway, back in the world of guitars. So yeah, so my plan with this is to do two things really. Two or three little things today. I've made a decision that I'm not going to do any destructive work to this bridge. If somebody came to me and said, look, I don't really care, just go and slice it off, I'm never going to spend the money on a neck reset, and I certainly can't afford to take it 40 miles up the road to a place, and I'm not going to put to a place to be dehumidified properly, and I'm not going to put silica gel in my case and put it in there for 6 months. Just chop it away and do it. Then yes, we can make it play lower. It's just common kind of mechanics, and you can take this down a fair bit further before it runs out of room. But I'm not going to do it on this case because I think it's a nice old classic Yamaha, and it does sound nice and feels nice as is, and it deserves to play as well as it can. So and I think my customer has another guitar that could do with having the same thing done, and if it's only £25 a time, I think booking it in for a stay at this particular place is a pretty good investment for both guitars. So I'm going to recommend that that she does that. So in the meantime, what can I do to make this more? I mean, in a sense, she only brought it along for a restring. So the first thing I've got is a nice set of elixirs, which will sparkle and spruce up this thing. Fingerboard's absolutely filthy, so that could do with the clean. Like I said, as it stands, it's got a nice old nut on here, but the action is too high. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to work the action down, and it's also pinging a little bit, so the nut slots aren't perfect. So what I'll do is, with the old strings on, is I will recut these slots and widen them so that they work at a really nice low first fret action. Now of course, if she takes this up and gets it dehumidified, then we're going to need to re-look at the action in terms of the nut and the saddle again, and the saddle will either need shimming, and this also may need shimming because the whole overall first fret action will go down a bit. Now I'm not going to do this so low today that we don't take that into consideration. I mean, for example, you know, you can simulate it yourself. You could press down on here to a nice low playing action, and you could then measure the heights here and go, right, I'm going to take that much off. Take your hand off there, and you can see that the geometry means that that angle only increases a tiny bit, or the measurements only increase a tiny bit down here. So at the moment, you know, it's looking like about 1 millimetre and a bit, which is way too high to comfortably play. So the positive thing is I know that with a bit of nut work here, we can make this thing play better. Add some new strings, clean the fretboard, and we've got a nice feeling spruced up guitar, but with recommendations for what would be a smart investment. And both of her guitars are in cases, so I think knowing that she lives in a damp house, I think it's really a good idea for her to practice with these to keep them in a case. Now, I don't in my house, partly because it isn't quite so humid, but also because I don't have a case for my acoustic. I've sort of sold them or used them for selling guitars and stuff. And it's not such a big problem, but in a sense I would really also like to do that. My Taylor Baby has a little bit of bellying too, and I would like to try and take care of that and see if I can't do it. But again, it's when you're protecting it from humidity, a soft case isn't going to keep the water out as well as a shell case, you know, like a Hiscox or something like that, or a Gator, no, what are the 3-letter thing? I can't remember. Anyway, but you know, the Gator hard case thing. The cases that she has for her guitars aren't also plastic shell cases. They are the plywood and soft material stuff. Anyhow, okay, you know, some people go, well, that's too much information, yada yada, and you've talked for ages. Yes, but you know, it's kind of stuff. If you're looking at your old favourite guitar and you're thinking, what do I do with it? It's, you know, is it worth 40, 45 minutes of, I don't know what, 41 minute, I don't know how long, is that really in actual minutes? It says 04, doesn't mean anything, does it? Is it worth that much time to think about what you're going to do? Well, I reckon so. The other thing about looking at this is the frets aren't so bad, they're quite well played, but there are no notches that are going to hold the strings up. They're played in nice, but they've got life in them. Luckily this bang where it's fallen on its face has pretty much missed the fret, so there's no major damage there. So like I said, can't do much about this end for now, we're accepting that. So I'm going to start by measuring up or checking the clearance on this top end, and I've got a measurement of my replacement string, so I can work a set of nut files in a moment off those measurements. With this I'm going to go with a 0.4 as a target, and I can see it's absolutely miles off that. I suspect this is going to be in the sort of 1.2 region, so let's dial in 1.2 and just have a look, because if it is just under actually, what have we got? Let's go 0.9 then. You know, if it's around the 1 mil mark, which it is, I'd say it's about 1 millimeter. That's 0.6, so it's a good half a millimeter and a bit too tall, or taller than it needs to be. Now of course we know that that is partly increased by this rising action over here. If that action came down to a nice amount, then action will correspondingly reduce by a fraction down here. If we go for 0.4 and she successfully gets some dehumidification out of this down here, like I said, even if I press down to the end here, which we'll never have as low an action as that, I can still see that this is coming in at, well, it's over 0.5. So at worst we are never going to be down below 0.2, even if we had the strings on the deck down here, which we will never have, because there will always be a 2 millimeter at least at that last fret. So I think 0.4 is a safe target for the guitar in this situation. But even if when the action finally came down through dehumidification, even if that changed to a bit that wasn't comfortable, i.e. it was uncomfortably low, which I doubt it will be, then we still can just knock off the nut and put a new one in, and reset, or shim this existing one. So there's no, these are smaller details, and if for a consumer those things might cost 5 to 10 quid each, but if you buy them, you know, in bulk, you bone nuts and saddles from China and places like that, then you obviously can get them a lot cheaper than that, but you have to wait. So the secret here is I want to make this thing work with my set of strings that are bought for it. So if I'm going to excuse me, if I'm going to file these out, I just want to get me a corresponding set of files that are a little bit higher than each. Now as you can see here, I did pull out a set of nuts, potential replacement nuts if I needed them, but I may well not. Okay, so first string is listed as an 11, so I'm going to go no smaller than 13. Then we've got 15, I'll go no smaller than 17, that's still probably a bit tight. 22, no smaller than 24, kind of corresponding roughly with a 10 set as well, but a little tighter. 32, that's too close to the mark for my liking, so I'd want to go 36. 32, 42, I'd want to go 46. And then the last one in this list, where's my 46? 46. Last one in this list is a 52, which I don't have except in this. Where have they gone? My bass guitar files, which are over here, kicking around somewhere. I just have to measure which one of these it is when I come to it. Okay. So I'm going to do this the way I would normally do this type of guitar, and that is to start with the D and just work outwards. And I say I'm aiming for a 0.4, you know, because I'm aiming for something that's playable and with a perceptible action improvement right now, until the midterm dehumidifying perhaps adjusting the saddle and the nut again. Longer term neck reset if it's a if it's a guitar of great sentimental value. So we're taking care of the short term stuff we can do today. This is interesting. It's the slots on these things are always much bigger than the actual string gauge, because they're designed to accommodate quite a range of different gauges, obviously, because customers have different preferences. So no manufacturer is going to kind of box themselves in to a single gauge string choice. So I'm doing a combination of this triangle file to just get the bulk moving in this slot, kind of cut away the bulk, but also to do it in a way that the sides are mostly pointing outwards for the time being. And we're almost there now. And then I'm finishing off with the actual gauge that I'm aiming for, so that I can get the bottom of this notch nicely rounded out with the correct gauge. Pretty much there on that one. I like how it is. It's still quite high. It's high by electric guitar standards, actually. But I usually aim for sort of 0.3, between 0.3 and 0.4 at the most for an electric. So here I'm going 0.4 as a default. And I can see the amount of shadow underneath. I'll stop there for a minute. I'm quite comfortable with that. And we put this A back in. For that one, switching our gauge. So this is a small improvement. The original nut is bone, so well, the nut that's on here is bone, so it's been quite compliant in terms of the way it cuts, which is great. That makes it a lot easier to make the adjustment. If it was plastic, for me it's one of those things that doesn't perform dependably in my book. I much prefer bone every time. I don't even like tusk when it comes to nuts. They just, something about the way it cuts just doesn't seem to be as predictable or dependable as bone. Now that could be just one could just find fault in my technique, and I don't mind that. But I guess you kind of rely on what you feel comfortable using. Plastic tends to have this horrible, variously spongy or grippy kind of behaviour. Still got loads of room under there. I'm just going to step back. I always wimp out on the first one, so I'm going to come back. There's no point chickening out so early. Yeah, so plastic just it cuts irregularly, which means that percentage-wise I suffer from a huge number of miscuts. So it's actually, using plastic for me is a pretty big time waster, because I get down, let's see that one's gone down just on the mark. Right. Yeah, plastic is a time waster, because I'll find that I'll lose 4 out of 10 plastic nuts that I try to cut to the correct action, because it's just it's unpredictable and non-dependable, so I don't like it. Bone is much more dependable, which represents a much better investment in effort and time if you're going to do this a lot, or if you're going to do it at all. Almost there with this one. So I can see that's quite a change already in the action of this guitar at this end. And I think one of the things that's great is when you do get this action right. I think I might just leave that one there. When you do get this action right, you get a big payoff for a very small adjustment. customer enjoys that quick benefit of doing this. Like I say, at most for the cost or the expense of a new nut later on when she's adjusted or addressed the humidity issue, which I hope she'll do. So take this one off, a bit of kind of bulk work. Now this one I'm going to use the 48, but I probably need to just round it out with a slightly bigger one, which will be one of these base ones, and I've forgotten. They're not actually numbered, so I have to check with the micrometer thing. The vernier calipers. Set 2. Oh no, the battery's died. Come on fellas, help me out. It really has. Oh no, now it's back. Thank you. Let's find out which edge I'm looking for. It's 56 on that edge. 44. We'll go 56, that's over the 52, that will do me. Off on, please. Fat edge on this one, remember that. Let me just get my head around. What am I doing? 13, 17, 24. Ha! Okay. Any bright-eyed person would have spotted that I've been using the wrong ones. But there we go. So let me just cut this. This is a little bit flat. Wow, okay. That's just popped out there. That's not the end of the world. It's because I've raised it up. Try and be careful if I can in this one. Still loads of room. If you get stuck, where's the 48? Use the largest one you've got, and then just use the less than perfect one to over finish it, if you like. So I'm going to use the 48 here just to get, broadly speaking, down to where I want to get to, and then I'll just widen it slightly with the other one. If you have those, I often recommend using those pipe cleanery things just to give you round out the profile of the bottom of the nut slot, which is quite a good thing. Which I have got some of somewhere. Lift. And they're in here somewhere. I vacuumed up a whole bunch of them once, which was a bit silly. They went into the bowels of Henry and never to be seen again. Okay, so, oh god, you see that's where they go. Chucked on the floor. Oh no, it's just that's a spare bit of bass guitar string, which again is also a good little use. It's not very sharp, but if you're patient, that will round out the bottom of the slot for you. So it's a handy tool. But this one's got a little bit more bite on it. For that sort of roundy out bit. Again, watching that the end doesn't scrape on the headstock. So this is, you wouldn't have to do this if you had a full set of acoustic sized thingies, you know what I mean, files. But I don't, so I tend to kind of just, actually that's pretty good, just round that out. Yeah, I tend to slightly improvise the last one sometimes like this, but as I see, these welding nozzle cleaner things cost about £5 a set from China or somewhere, and actually they're not a bad make-do in conjunction with an ATP. Sub £1 I should say. Jeweler file. I'll do a little bit more. So you know, don't think you have to use the expensive stuff. You can get great results with a little bit of compromising here and there. That jeweler file thing is a pretty useful all-round tool, and it can get you a long way done in all of this. It certainly can. It can give you a very playable changed nut action. Still quite high. My tendency is to sort of wimp out, but it's still quite a bit high. So I'm going to just cut down. I'll go with the 48 wherever it's gone, or again. Okay, so I'll put those aside for now, put that back wherever I took it from. Now we've got the top three to do. I'm going to do the same backwards, so drop off the high E. Looking at this thing from the side, down the other end, there's absolutely almost no brake angle over that saddle, so it has been kind of over lowered in the past. So let me just double check this. Quite a lot of clearance. So what I'll do is I'll just open it out, because at the moment it's a very straight slot. So I'm going to turn it into a little bit of a V, just for ease of access to the slot. And then I'll go to the downwards bit with the appropriate tool. And then try it again. And then I'll just, sorry, this is really sharp on the fingers. I'll just again widen it out a little bit. This is where experience comes in, knowing how much you can do before you go too far with the wrong tool. You know, what I want to do is I want to go down a bit, but I want to always leave the last little bit of the cutting to the actual nut file, so I get the rounded out bottom of the slot. And you can get pretty good at guessing where to stop. I'm very close on that one, so now I do the correct file for the bottom of the slot. Drop it in. Go. Hurts the fingers, but it's worth it. So as a general rule, this adjustment on any guitar, being electric or acoustic, is a really big payoff. There we are. That was almost fractionally under, but I'll live with it. It's a big payoff on any guitar, electric or acoustic, to give you a much lighter action at that end. At the nut end, and it plays like a different guitar as a result. Okay, so I'm now going to use the 17. That's hugely high at the moment, so I can do a bit more with this triangular thing. And you can see quite quickly as you come down, because the bottom of this V is very, very sharp and precise, so you can kind of quite quickly get to where you want to get to with just this alone, and then kind of back off with and revert to the nut files that you need for the final string. Now these are chosen from my set, but they're actually quite close to the target gauge, so I wouldn't be surprised if they're just a fraction sticky by the time we actually put the new strings on, but that's okay. We'll use some sandpaper to widen the slots out. Okay, that's good, we'll go with that. It's just the same as the previous one. Switch over. Okay, so again, check what we've got. Not so much clearance here, only a little, so I'm just going to start. I might do a tiny widening just to stop it pinching. Drop it back in, check it, and then go with the appropriate file. 13 thou is a very, very small, thin thing, hence it bends and often ends up breaking. But actually it's quite good when they break because the warm part of the file snaps off and you get a fresh bit of teeth, which is not a bad thing. Sometimes I actually break them on purpose when they're starting to really grow old, and it's either that or a new set. So hellfire, let's just break off a few bits. Okay, stop with that one there. Right, so we have now a set of strings and a very different action. Okay, so I'm now going to remove old strings and we can throw them well and truly away. We'll give this thing a clean up and put some new strings on it, and I think it'll feel and sound pretty nice. It's only I mean, how does this work? Oh, that's confusing. What? I don't understand that. Okay, this is a strange threading arrangement, which is beyond my ken, as they say. So let's chuck those up now. Get rid of them. By the way, a lot of people worry about cutting strings under tension, as if the sudden movement of the wood would, I don't know, turn into damage or something. Can't see any physical explanation of why that would make any sense. It kind of goes along with the arguments about slacking off the strings, you know, shipping a guitar somewhere. I don't see any explanation of why that makes sense. I hate to say it for those who don't like this particular character, but I'm with Scott Grove on some of these issues. I think whether you like him or not as a internet YouTubey type person, and I can understand why a lot of people don't. For me, he's a very he's very kind of evidence-based in many of the things he says, and I kind of go along with that personally. You know, and it's kind of partly why when some people make it the business to insist to me that I'm doing something wrong, not because they have lived experience or kind of personal experience, evidence of, you know, tried and tested evidence of doing it some other way, or another way being the correct way. Oh, look at that. But because, you know, they sort of believe it to be the right way, for all kinds of good or bad reasons. I'm not really here to judge those, but I find it difficult. It's kind of slightly amusing in some ways when you see this way of stringing it is such a pain to get undone. Yeah, you know, when your own experience of several hundred guitar setups goes against somebody's doctrine or dogma that they, you know, for the best will in the world they believe in because they think it's right, but you've got day in day out experience of the contrary being the case. It's a bit hard to sort of stomach listening to people telling you you're wrong despite all the evidence you have, demonstrable evidence. And I don't mean sort of evidence like belief-based evidence. I'm talking about, you know, when you take a guitar that isn't playing and you make it play better, and then somebody says, hey, you've made it play better, I love how it plays now, thank you. That kind of evidence is, you know, there's no point trying to hold dogma up against that and try and convince me that the dogma is worth holding on to, because it's, I'll go with what the customers say about their experience of playing the guitar afterwards, not what somebody in a forum tells somebody else is the right way to do something, because somebody knew a luthier who trained in Milan or something or whatever. Now, don't get me wrong, I have nothing against anyone who trained there and people who know far more than I about any of these things, and I will, as soon as they demonstrate why the thing is an efficacious way of doing it, I will switch to doing it or borrowing something of that technique. And a good example of that, in case you hadn't noticed, was I, like most people, started out levelling my frets in the traditional way. See, that wasn't glued in, by the way, but it's kind of cool because it gives me a chance to clean it. Yeah, I started levelling my frets in the familiar way, which was to take the neck and flatten it out, and then use a levelling beam to clean up and to remove any uneven frets sticking out from as flat a playing field as you could possibly get. And when I first saw the katana method as proposed or seized on or demonstrated by the guy who invented the katana fret leveling tool, I thought it was ridiculous, impossible. I couldn't see it from that paradigmatic point of view, right? And I just wrote it off as mad. How can you level frets with a curved thing? Of course you're going to scoop out and make a mess of them. Blah 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 blah. Until I bought the tool and tried it, and then I suddenly realised, oh shit. Yeah, right, well, we'll clean that up anyway. And I suddenly realised that that was actually a brilliant way of doing it, and so that's the way I do it from now on. Nothing wrong with spilling your naphtha, other than it's bloody expensive. So that was a waste of money. Anyway, so I'm just taking some surface grime off this thing. Now, this guitar has some things in it. Woo! It's got some vintage fluff. It'll go in the bin. I also think it does need a little visit from Henry. It's got a pure tone plectrum at 0.46, a couple of dead insects. What I'm going to do is I think I'm going to, for my customer, I'm going to take off these tuners, because this is a filthy headstock, and because taking off the tuners will take me an extra 5 or 10 minutes most, and it will allow me to give everything a really nice clean, and so the guitar will get that extra freshened up feel to it, for not a lot of extra effort. Why not, eh? Because otherwise you'll never get in behind these tuners. That's the thing I noticed in the past. You'll never get a nice smooth clean off on the headstock. So these are, these got two pinning them down, so it's a bit of a fiddle. Okay, 12 minutes, 14, 20. Who cares? It's worth it. I am worth it. Just want to say a quick warm thank you to my friend in Ohio who left me a comment, but no name. Stringerling, I think his ID was, left a comment to say how much he'd gained from. Okay, we have some. All right, it's a fiddle, but I'm going to do it. Yeah, how much he'd enjoyed spending time in the shed with me on these videos, and it's just really nice to make virtual friends, even if you don't right there get a chance to actually meet people in the flesh. I wish I could afford to travel around the world and meet loads of people, but as somebody else, another friend of mine, pointed out, that it is what the internet was invented for, the ability to do this and to share stuff. And I follow a couple of people on kind of completely some of them on totally unrelated things, who make, I suppose, vlogs, you would call them, of sort of day-to-day life in their part of the world, and it's just wonderful to spend time with them in their environment. And what I like best about it is they don't have to be doing anything clever or over-presented or snappy or anything like that. It's just the hanging out and spending time with them that's the fun part. Okay, so we have in here these, they call them ferrules, and they kind of need to come out, ideally, would come out for this stage. I'm just going to see if it's easy, but if it's not, then I'm not going to fight them. I'll worry about getting around the edges of the front bit. I don't think I'll fight them. On an electric neck, I usually have it's a bit easier to prop it up and knock them out, but it's not critical here. What I'm looking to do is just mainly clean, so I can help it along with just this little bit of a solvent scrub. And there's so much aged gunge on here that it will take a little bit of time to come off. The problem with this stuff is you leave the lid off, you're vulnerable to it falling over. Now it's never going to shine because this, I don't think it doesn't look like it was hugely shiny way back when, but it's definitely got a load of build-up of years of grime on it. At least clean up some of it. Let's have a look and see if there's any removable grime still on there. Yeah, you can just about see where it still has some around the edges here. Amazing how ingrained it gets. Yeah, so I've a couple of podcasts that I think I've recommended in the somewhere in before in these guitar setup videos, but one of them is Jude Gold's No Guitar is Safe podcast, which I think is a brilliant piece of guitar podcasting. There are a lot of, you may have heard them, if you've ever gone looking for a guitar focused podcast, you may have found this, like me, you find a lot of podcasts about guitars seem to consist mainly of some guys, almost always male, some guys in a room, possibly at the back of a shop, talking about kit, you know, usually kind of going into a lot of detail about pedals or particular new boutique amps or a new model of guitar or something. And it's kind of interesting up to a point, in the same way as it's interesting to talk amongst ourselves about new kit. But what I love about Jude Gold's podcast is that he doesn't do that. First of all, he's a guitar player, and so he picks up his guitar and goes to the home, usually, or a studio, of a new guitarist each week or each episode. And they're well-known guitarists, I mean big name guitarists. I think the first episode was Joe Satriani. But he goes to a load of people that I would never have heard of particularly or listened to, and he goes to their home in somewhere near him in, I guess, LA somewhere, and takes a guitar and has a style of interviewing where first of all, it's not in a rush. There's no fast edit to get to the end of a show and out. You know, it's I guess he gets an hour or two put aside with these people, and they basically talk and jam together. And you know, Jude's a capable guitarist. He plays with Fairport Convention, maybe, Jefferson, no, one of these names, Jefferson Star Airplane, Starship, train line, I don't know, Jefferson Starship, the latest incarnation. Anyway, he's a kind of younger guy, but he's playing with the big old greats as a sort of, you know, the new blood in the band kind of thing. So he plays loads of kind of old classics, so he knows all the stuff. But anyway, he plays with his interviewees, and it's a mixture of very generous jamming, which is so not ego filled usually, which I really like about it. It's very ego less, and it's, as a result, it's quite, I find it quite inspiring, as opposed to so many other kind of interviews where a major guitar star gets to whittle off and show us how fantastic they are, which I often find leaves me kind of no sense of, is there, you know, there's nothing in it for me. You know, I'm never going to be 14 and practicing in my bedroom again, and I will never have enough time to relive my life and do all the practice necessary to be that. So it's all too easy for it to be demotivating or something. Anyway, the way that Jude does it, I find is great, because it is so uplifting and inspiring when it could be demotivating, and I think that's what's fantastic about his approach. So heartily recommend it. No Guitar is Safe podcast. You can find, there's a Facebook page he has, and you can probably find it on whatever podcast player you may use. But a couple of other things is I have a couple of people who make travel vlogs, video travel podcasts. One of them is a guy who, I think he's in the priesthood or something. He's a religious character, but with his work, his ministry or something, he seems to go around the world, but he doesn't talk anything about religion, which is kind of fine for me, but he does some beautiful photography and narrates where he's going, and a combination of his sort of beautiful pictures, beautiful filming, and his drone photography. Those two things, or those three things together, make a really nice travel experience. So his PRSW 100, I think it is, Scion X Films or something like that. Hard to remember exactly, but it's all 4K footage, which is kind of like being there visually. Anyway, so he's another one, and then there's a couple of people I was born in Trinidad in the Caribbean, and kind of miss there. I haven't been back for many years, and so there's always a part of me that would like to go back. And the next best thing is to let some local people take me around. So there's a couple of people I watch or follow their blogs. One of them is a guy called Tariq, who just blogs his taking films of places around the island, which is great. It's like I get to revisit places I know and some I don't know. But more enjoyably, I get to sort of hang out with his friends, driving around, and it's just like being part of somebody's sort of their expedition or their little outing amongst friends. And I think that's what Stringerling from Ohio was kind of saying that he liked watching these for, which was just like being kind of unhurried, spending a bit of unhurried time with someone so you feel like you know them. And I think that's what I like. The best aspects of podcasts for me are the ones where you really feel you know something of the people and their lives when it's done. Wow, this is more baked on grime than I'd kind of expected, but it's very old, so why am I surprised? So typically I might have done this off camera, in a bit of quiet time in between doing other things, so it's not exactly an onerous task, although it's a little bit labour intensive. Hurts the fingers after a while. But once these are cleaned up, then I just have to put the tuners back together again, and then we'll be ready to restring with some fresh strings, and Karen will be with guitar again in fairly short order, so it's not a big setup. This nut came straight off, so I will reattach it with a tiny spot of glue. Not essential. There's so much force on the strings that the nuts tend to stay pretty much where you want them without glue, like that one, but they will surprise you. If they don't have glue, they will surprise you when you take the strings off, because they'll pop off. Whew. Wow, grubby. While I'm at it, let's try and clean up this nut a bit. Now this was playing fine. I will very lightly glue it down, and I say lightly because I know already that if any dehumidification on this guitar is successful, then this guitar will need that nut action to be reconsidered. So we're setting it for as it is now, which is obviously going to be hopefully a temporary situation, although I can't be entirely sure, because we're talking, the facility for doing the dehumidification is about an hour away, or actually from Karen about an hour and a half max. So it's not a insignificant thing to get your arrangements sorted and go up and dump it and then go back in 5 days and pick it up. If you don't normally pass that way, it's an excursion with a purpose. But I think I would like to do it. And the other thing I'd obviously thought about is, I've had so many guitars now come through here that really need that treatment. I really ought to build myself and research and build myself a cabinet that does that same thing here. Not to outcompete somebody, just because it just makes sense if there isn't a closer facility. I need it, other people need it, so there's clearly a demand for it. So it would be silly not to investigate what it would take to do it. Now, it may not be massively straightforward, so I don't assume it would be. worth doing a bit of exploration in. So I'm putting these back on. We've got the inner screw and then the double outer screw. It's interesting to note that the inner screw wasn't very tightly done up, and the outer screw is longer, so you've got to keep them all sensibly identified so you know which is which. And even when done, this isn't all of the goo off these covers, and I'll try and do a last bit of polish, but it's most of it. But they're nice quality. I mean, you know, it's proof that a lot of people think that tuners have to be some sort of exotic brand thing. These are one gear, obviously. You know, there's a brass gearing, there is a knurled thread on the tuner button arm knob, and it tunes the strings up. And these are no more complex in many ways than just about every other tuner you could choose to invest your money in when you come to upgrading. The only difference would be, in my experience, has been the gearing of the, you know, the finer the gearing, the more you have to turn it to get the same amount of movement, but actually the smoother the process of tuning feels. And that's not a bad reason to upgrade. It's nice to have very smooth gearing. Feels more precise than the 15:1 ratio type stuff, or worse. I don't know what the worst is, but you know, but it's not a kind of, it isn't the science of rocketry, let's put it that way. So these are every bit capable of holding tune. You know, somebody asked a comment, or put a comment on a YouTube video the other day, you know, saying, will changing the tuners improve tuning stability? And the answer is no. You know, and there's a whole sort of belief system out there that it will, and constantly you see the people in the know, inverted commas, in forums, you know, the experts in forums often making that the first recommendation when somebody's struggling with tuning problems. I mean, it's rewarding to see that a lot of people also do recognise that the root of tuning instability is in fact the nut, which is great. So a lot of people deal with that. But the problem is with all these things online, and it's the biggest, one of the biggest issues of our times actually, is that the downright batshit crazy, as some people would say, coexists on apparently equal footing with evidenced, logical evidenced information, fact. And the problem with the internet, in one sense, along with it being a great thing to bring you the lives of others and give you that kind of resource of stuff you can consult, one of the problems it brings is that it makes the nonsensical look equivalent to the deeply factual and the case proven, you know, the sort of historically laboured over, you know, proofs that people have struggled hard to scientifically test and disprove, and in doing so, you know, reassert their validity. You know, the more the scientific method, the more the community challenges, questions a premise or a hypothesis, the stronger that is as a result, if it still stands up to you know, close scientific rigorous scrutiny, I should say, evidence-based scrutiny. And that's why I like it, and that's why what I do here is, wherever I can do it, is based on that same sort of evidence. But in the world, you only have to go on a single guitar forum to see that in the in the world of forums or anywhere online, the guy who's posting something that absolutely makes total sense, and it makes total sense, about, let's say, the condition of a nut slot and its role in tuning stability, that guy's viewpoint looks and weighs exactly the same as the viewpoint of somebody else who comes on and posts right next to him that it's no, it's all down to buying some decent tuners, dude. Here are some Shallers or some Goto locking tuners that you've got to get, otherwise it just won't stay in tune. And the two things seem to be of the same weight. You've got no way. And the problem isn't that well, part of the problem is that they appear to have the same credibility and the same weight. The other part of the problem, probably the bigger part of the problem, is that too few people now know how to evaluate one and decide or make evaluate it and assess whether it has more or less worth than the other one. And so it continues to live in that sort of equivalence, which is really worrying. So the problem I've got here, just for this minute, is if I start putting these on in earnest, this nut isn't going to stick down. I think my CA glue has just about started to lose its grip on reality, so I'm going to have to buy some more. So the problem is this pushes it sideways. So I'm going to take this off and drag this across until the whole thing dries. See if I can get it to sit somewhere where it should while it dries, if it dries. Okay. Alright, look, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop for a bit, let this nut dry off, do a little bit more cleaning up here and there, and then finish off with a quick strum once the strings are on. See you in a minute. Okay, restrunged, and oh, I'm on noisy thing, sorry, hang on. Phone out of the way. Just about to go in the house. So, restrung. Action at the far end, not really adjusted at all. Action at this end, lighter. This is running out of steam. This has got to be dehumidified, or else these two notes here will lose any play. You're about had it. We've got no break angle on that. Well, on the E there's none whatsoever. So technically that really needs a shim up at that end to improve it. It's going to be so small. I think the secret has got to be take care of the dehumidification to improve that. It sounds great for what it is. Sounds lovely, but more work needed, so we need to move on to the midterm adjustments. But this will play nicely in the very short term, as long as it's chords down this end. But as soon as we get some dehumidification down this end, then that clearance is not going to be enough naturally, because it's going to reduce the angle. And then at the end of a dehumidification, we need to see whether or not this neck needs a reset. To be quite honest, if we can get any action improvement out of this, maybe a replacement on the bridge, the nut and the saddle, after the dehumidification, just to give it a new setup, then I think that's got a few more years life in it before needing to kind of write it off, because I think with an old Yamaha like this, unless there's something very special about it, I don't think this makes economic sense to reset the neck. But as it stands, it's better than it was in the very short term, but we've got a plan for the mid and long term. So there we go. Thanks for sticking around with it. Hope you found something useful in there. Remember, as always, buy the merchandise. No, I'm joking. Yeah, buy my ebook. I never say that, but yeah, buy my ebook if you want to see how to do all of this step by step. And if you can, buy it direct from me, because if you buy it from Amazon, they take 2/3. If you buy it from iTunes, no. Yeah, about like, Amazon takes more than, Amazon is about 2/3, iTunes is more than a half. If you buy it direct from me, then I get the cover price, which is much better for me. Obviously, it helps me continue to do this and to eat and stuff, and maybe occasionally buy something else to wear in the shed. Get my little violin out. But yeah, if you want to buy it direct from me, just send me an email directly. Details are somewhere on the YouTube thing. Or you can send me direct at samdeeks@gmail.com, and we can go from there. Or it's as simple as sending me £25 GBP via PayPal to the same address, samdeeks@gmail.com, and I will send you a link by return. If you do buy it through PayPal direct from me, please let me know whether you need a PDF or an iBooks format, so then I can send you the right format. The PDF format is bigger, it's about 300 megabytes big. The iBooks version for use on Macs, Apple phones and iPads and stuff like that is only about 70 megabytes, I believe. Anyway, but that's the only merchandise I'm trying to flog, but it would support me if you were interested in doing that. And it has 165 pages of stuff covering all the basic facts and the insights that I've learned about setting up guitars, kind of in an attempt to demystify it a bit, so there isn't any sort of brand worship or dogma worship you'll find in there. It's just about what I've learned from doing it, and hopefully simplifies a lot of it. And I've had lots of great feedback from people who've used it to very great success with their own guitar collections. So it does work, and it's worked for over 500 setups in here in this little coal shed in southern England. So if you're interested in supporting me with merchandise, that's the only thing I've got for sale, and that would be great if you haven't already bought it. If you have, thank you very much in advance. I mean, no, in response to having bought it, I really appreciate your support so far. Yeah, from Reload Guitars, Kirk out.